Senator Martin.
Honourable Senators, I rise today to pay tribute to the service and sacrifice of our brave veterans of the Korean War and to all those who paid the ultimate sacrifice with their lives. June 25th, 2023 will mark the 73rd anniversary of the breakout of the Korean War. Nearly 27,000 brave young Canadians selflessly volunteered to serve their country and fight for the freedom of South Korea from communist tyranny. Today, these courageous men and women are now in their late 80s and 90s. Some, who are also World War II veterans, are more than 100 years of age. We recently lost one such hero and beloved friend, Joseph Quinn, who was 102. Over the years, I've had the privilege of getting to meet and hear the stories of so many of our Korean War veterans, and I'm truly honored to know them. I have seen the pain in their eyes when they speak of what they experienced during the war, the deafening sounds of gunshots, explosions, screams, and then silence, the friends they made and those whom they lost in battle, the beautiful children and desperate families living in despair and poverty, memories of the Korean War that they will never forget and that we could never truly comprehend. Our veterans left their homes to defend a country and a people whom they didn't know, and human rights, and that is what they fought for. Their Herculean efforts and the ultimate sacrifices that the Canadians made on the Korean Peninsula surpass any amount of gratitude we can express in words. We stand on the shoulders of those whose service and sacrifice have given us the very freedoms we enjoy and take for granted today. We live in freedom, but freedom is not free. Many paid the price for our freedom with their lives. July 27, 2023 will mark the historic 70th anniversary of the Korean War armistice and the conclusion of the 70th anniversary of the Korean War years, which began on June 25th, 3 years ago. This weekend in Ottawa, I have the honor of hosting, along with Veterans Affairs Canada, the Embassy of the Republic of Korea, and the Canadian War Museum, a special Veterans Weekend in honor of this milestone year. Korean War veterans from across Canada will gather in Ottawa for this special commemoration. Honourable Senators, as time goes on, our veterans age and pass. Therefore, we must do our part now to remember and honour them. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux. We will remember them.
Senator Deakin, Nova Scotia.
Thank you, Your Honour. Honourable colleagues, technological change is accelerating. The benefits, disruptive effects, and risks are spreading faster and deeper than ever before. Each month, we are learning about another emerging technological advancement. Many large global experiments are in real time, and they're in a way that regulatory systems are entirely unprepared to manage. But we have to find a way. Deepfake videos and photos can be created for a few dollars but cause lasting harms. Cybersecurity threats and autonomous vehicles are just the tip of the iceberg. What to do? We regulate in decades, and these technologies are changing each month. Governments currently do not have the legislative or regulatory processes or capacity to catch up or keep up to these increasingly rapid changes. So here are two initiatives that I think offer some hope. One was inspired by MP Michelle Rempel-Garner when she proposed the formation of a new Parliamentary Caucus on Emerging Technology, which I'm delighted to co-chair along with MPs Brian Massey and Anthony Housefather. You're invited to join other interested parliamentarians to learn from experts about the implications of AI, blockchain technologies, quantum computing, and the increasing use of personal data. As we rise soon and take a well-deserved break from the legislative agenda, we have to face the uncomfortable fact that technology will not pause. Last month, the announcement of this caucus received a lot of positive response and tremendous interest. Our vehemently nonpartisan caucus of parliamentarians hope to better understand the issues and learn from regulators, industry experts, and international bodies. The second initiative offering hope emerged from debates led by Senator Wu's sponsorship of Bill S6, the Annual Regulatory Modernization Act. As our committee studied and we debated this bill in the chamber last spring, some practical opportunities emerged as to how we could alter how we regulate at a federal level. One idea was to create a whole-of-government framework to guide both the consistent use of regulatory sandboxes and the use of standards as a method for updating regulations while continuing to provide the necessary protections to citizens. Regulatory sandboxes enable regulators and innovators to learn from one another, and incorporating standards as being equivalent to regulations provides us a way to start to keep up while still using robust processes that engage innovative new entrants, incumbents, academics, and regulators. And Treasury Board is currently examining these opportunities, which is good news. Canada can become a trusted leader in the deployment and use of innovative technologies in the future, but it requires our parliamentarians and our regulators to keep trying new approaches and not let past practice prevent us from implementing best practices. Thank you, colleagues.
Senator Cardozo.
Thank you, Your Honour. I rise today to speak about Welcoming Week in Ottawa. This week I had the pleasure of speaking at the launch of Welcoming Ottawa Week, or WOW. Welcoming Ottawa Week was created by the Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership, which aims to convey to newcomers Ottawa's respect and genuine welcome, create diverse opportunities for newcomers to connect with the Ottawa public across the city, with institutions and local organizations. This year we celebrate the 10th anniversary of WOW. The Ottawa Local Immigration Partnership, OLIP, is an impressive multi-sectoral partnership of 64 Ottawa organizations working in diverse sectors such as settlement, language, training and interpretation, and economic integration, united in the mission of building Ottawa's capacity to attract, settle, and integrate immigrants. It links newcomers to employers. L'OLIP est une initiative financée par...
The initiative was started by Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, and thanks to its collaborative model with all of society, there are local partnerships for innovation in 87 cities and towns across the country.
Cities and towns across the country use this collaborative model. Now, here's the important thing about successful immigrant integration. I recall a conversation with Jason Kenney some years ago while he was Federal Immigration Minister. He was noting proudly that Canada has retained its high immigration levels through the 07-08 recession while the rest of the world were shutting their gates. He noted that the public support for immigration had remained high in Canada because we work on integration so successfully. Successful integration not only helps the newcomers of today, but it continuously creates public support for future immigration, thus making for a more harmonious society and one that will continue to welcome immigrants. This said, we should never rest on our laurels. We must continue to do and support the hard work, especially as there remain many gaps. As a caution, we must always be watchful of the polarization and opposition, misinformation and disinformation regarding immigration and diversity that is rampant in many countries, including the U.S., and is certainly creeping into Canadian society. May we spend this summer thinking about how we continue to improve this peaceable kingdom we call Canada. Thank you.
Senator Lafreda.
Senator Lafreda. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Senators, I rise today to pay tribute to Montreal International, Greater Montreal's economic development agency, whose goal is to act as a powerful lever for economic development and to promote the metropolis internationally.
Montreal International has had another record-breaking year in attracting direct foreign investments. International organizations, entrepreneurs, talented workers, and international students to the region. Since 1996, the nonprofit organization has been successful in positioning the city as a top destination for foreign investments. In 2022, Montreal International helped facilitate nearly $3.6 billion in foreign direct investment. According to its annual report, 102 projects will benefit and over 8,000 jobs will be created at an average annual salary of $88,000. A record-setting 21 projects will be in communities outside Montreal. Beyond good-paying, family-supporting jobs, what else do these foreign investments mean for residents of the city and Canadians in general? No less than $500 million in tax revenue for governments and over $80 million in property taxes. This is money that can go back into our communities. Montreal International is more relevant than ever considering the global competition to attract investments. In fact, without its support, 82% of foreign direct investment projects would not have happened, would have been smaller, or would have incurred delays or higher costs. Montreal International gets things done. Honourable colleagues, I may be biased since I spent 13 years on its board as treasurer of the organization, but I think Montreal International is one of the best and more effective agencies of its kind, thanks to the talent, know-how, and expertise of its staff and board of directors. Many agree. In 2020, it was recognized as the best economic development agency in the world and also earned top marks for Best Investment Promotion Agency. Recently, the agency launched a talent recruitment website that has already benefited countless businesses. The organization is committed to international mobility and supporting employers who want to hire foreign talent. Honourable Senators, please join me in celebrating the work of Montreal International, in thanking them for their countless contributions to our economy, and in encouraging them to continue its ambitious agenda of attracting more foreign investments to Canada. Thank you. Merci.
Senator Boisvenu. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, it is with emotion, great emotion and pride that I address you today to pay tribute to my great source of motivation and energy, the one who has guided my steps for nearly 14 years now here in the Senate. I'm speaking of my daughter, Julie. Every June 22nd, for the past 21 years, I've written a letter to my daughter to let her know what my mission and hers has achieved with difficulty. And it's important for me to share it with you, as this is our last June 22nd here among you. Dear Julie, you were a woman full of positive energy. You were a shining light who wasn't afraid to reach out to others and wrap them in your big smile and infectious energy. Others' happiness brought you happiness. On the evening of June 22nd, 2002, you and your friends were celebrating your recent promotion to manager at a Sherbrooke business. I was so proud of how far you'd come, even if you occasionally expressed your doubts about not living up to the boss's expectations. But each time I reminded you that success was not an end in itself, but rather the path you'd taken to become better. I remember that after our talks, your doubts would fade away, and you leave, placing a kiss on my cheek and saying, "Merci, mon petit papa." But at the end of that June 22nd evening, you had no idea that a sexual predator recently released from prison was on the hunt for his next prey. This predator, who was in the wrong place at the wrong time, confronted you, and no doubt because you tried to get away, kidnapped and confined you. And like many women who have been raped, you probably thought, if I don't resist, I'll stay alive. But he didn't want any witnesses to his heinous deed. He didn't want another conviction, so he murdered you and made your body disappear. What also shocked me deeply about this tragedy was that this sexual predator was intercepted twice by police officers in the evening before he took you away. In the absence of an investigative tool such as the sex offender registry, the police didn't pursue their investigation any further and let this future killer go, even though his name on such a registry would have saved your life. My dear daughter, you know, as do my colleagues, how deeply I hold my convictions regarding victims' rights, and if the defense of them focuses primarily on the fate of female victims of violence, it's because your fate, Julie, sealed the fate of my own. own life. Above all, your murder convinced me that our justice system wasn't doing enough for victims and their families, and 21 years later, it's still not doing enough. When the justice system doesn't venture into victims' territory, it does venture into victims' territory. It does so timidly that the changes are almost imperceptible. For victims in crimes, these changes have been achieved very slowly, all too often through suffer and re-victimization. This year, at last, after 8 years of hard work, we have succeeded in getting our bill passed regarding the wearing of electronic cuffs. If it had been in 2002, it would have saved your life, surely. Now and in the future, you'll be saving the lives of dozens of abused women. This afternoon, when I deliver my speech criticizing Bill S-12 on the sex offender registry, give me the wisdom to speak to my colleagues from the heart, to raise their awareness so that they understand, and I know that many do or will, that the fight to defend women's right to protection is a hard one, and that without their solidarity, too many women will continue to live in fear, and more will tragically lose their lives like you. Julie, thank you for the journey we've made together. We still have a long way to go, and I know you'll accompany me every step of the way. Je t'aime, merci.
Senator Umeedwar.
Honourable Senators, I first want to thank Senator Boisvenu for his relentless advocacy on behalf of victims of sexual crimes. I wish I could rise after that with somewhat more elevating words, but I can't, because tomorrow is June 23rd. It is a day that is seared in our national memory by a profoundly solemn and horrifying day in our past. 38 years ago, on June 23rd, Air India Flight 182 was brutally torn apart by a bomb explosion over the coast of Northern Ireland. All 329 passengers on board, including 82 children, 6 babies, and 29 entire families, lost their lives in this heinous act. This devastating event remains the most atrocious act of terrorism in the history of Canada. The families of the victims remember this tragic day every year. Most Indo-Canadians, and I look around to my Desi colleagues, they're shaking their heads, nodding their heads. Most Indo-Canadians remember exactly what we were doing at that moment when we received the news. We recall the phone calls we made to sons and daughters, mothers and sisters, fathers and brothers, wives and husbands, as we wrapped our arms around them. Just last night, I was with a friend whose uncle was the pilot on that ill-fated flight. Subsequently, inquiries and criminal investigations were launched. Miscommunication and competition between Canada's security services was disclosed, and justice was not done. The Canadian Indian community of victims organized and agreed to memorialize June 23rd as the National Day of Remembrance for victims of terrorism. And I commend them for being inclusive of other victims of terrorism. But this inclusion has come at a cost to them. Angus Reid released a poll today that said 9 out of 10 Canadians knew little or nothing about the largest successful terrorist attack against Canadians, and they are likely to be forgotten. In 2018, I wrote to Canada Post requesting them to memorialize the Air India victims, in particular through a stamp. I received a note back from the Director of Stamp Services saying they would bring this to the attention of the Stamp Advisory Committee. Radio silence since then. I have undertaken to rise as many times as I can to mark this day. In this chamber, at least, colleagues, let's remember Let's honor and let's keep their memory alive.
Chers collègues, je tiens sous
Dear colleagues, I would like to draw to your attention to the presence in the gallery of Pierre Menard. He is my guest today. He is retiring as Senate Director of TV for more than 31 years. After a successful career at CBC Parliamentary Television, Pierre joined the House of Commons in 1992. Over the ensuing decades, his role in the TV control room helped shape the way Canadians see parliamentarians. An advocate for a dynamic filming style, he always captured the energy of debate and the dignity of proceedings.
Television Director to date, who has worked extensively in both Houses of Parliament, as well as in committees of the Senate and the House of Commons. Throughout his tenure, he directed ceremonial events and addresses to Parliament by numerous world leaders. He holds the distinction of helming the first televised broadcast of the Senate chamber.
For anyone who has had the pleasure to meet Pierre, you will know he has a passion for Senate proceedings and all things parliamentary that is truly unrivaled. It is that heartfelt commitment to pursuing Senate broadcasting excellence, thereby ensuring the important work we do here is shared with Canadians, that I would like us to recognize and pay tribute to him today. Pierre Menard, thank you for all your work for the Senate of Canada.
Tabling of documents, dépôt de documents, présentation ou dépôt de rapports de comité, presenting or tabling reports from committees. Senator Patterson, Nunavut.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to present the 13th report of the Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples, which deals with Bill C-51, an act to give effect to the Self-Government Treaty recognizing the Whitecap Dakota Nation, Wapaha Dakota Oyoti, and to make consequential amendments to other acts.
The Standing Senate Committee on Indigenous Peoples has the honor to present its 13th report,
to which was referred Bill C-51, an act to give effect to the Self-Government Treaty recognizing the Whitecap Dakota Nation, Wapaha Dakota Oyati, and to make consequential amendments to other acts, has, in obedience to the order of reference of June 20th, 2023, examined the said bill and now reports the same without amendment. Respectfully submitted, Dennis Glenn Patterson.
Pursuant to order, this bill is automatically placed on the orders of the day for a third reading later this day. Government notices of motions, préavis de motion du gouvernement, préavis d'interpellation du gouvernement, government notices of inquiries, introduction and first reading of government bills, dépôt et première lecture de projets de loi du gouvernement.
Honourable Senators, a message has been received from the House of Commons with a Bill C-54 entitled An Act for Granting to His Majesty Certain Sums of Money for the Federal Public Administration for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024, to which they desire the concurrence of the Senate.
First reading of this bill. Première lecture de ce projet de loi.
Quand lirons-nous ce projet?
When shall this bill be read a second time? Senator Gold. Honourable Senators, with leave of the Senate and notwithstanding Article 561F, I move that the bill be placed on the orders of day for second reading later this day. Is leave granted, Honourable Senators? Leave is granted. Accordingly, it is ordered that this bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading later this day.
Honourable Senators, a message has been received from the House of Commons with a Bill C-55 entitled An Act for Granting to His Majesty Certain Sums of Money for the Federal Public Administration for the fiscal year ending March 31st, 2024, to which they desire the concurrence of the Senate.
First reading of this bill. Première lecture de ce projet de loi.
Shall this bill be read a second time? Senator Gold.
Honourable Senators, with leave of the Senate, and notwithstanding Rule 5-61F, I move that this bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading later this day.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted. Accordingly, it is ordered that this bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading later this day.
Honourable Senators, a message has been received from the House of Commons with a Bill C-42 entitled An Act to Amend the Canada Business Corporations Act and to make consequential and related amendments to other acts, to which they desire the concurrence of the Senate.
First reading of this bill. Première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall this bill be read a second time? Senator Gold. Honourable Senators, I move that the bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading in 2 days. It is moved by the Honourable Senator Gold, seconded by the Honourable Senator Laboucan-Benson, that this bill be placed on the orders of the day for second reading 2 days hence. Is it your pleasure, Honourable Senators, to adopt the motion? Carried.
Carried. Dépôt et première lecture de projet.
First.
Introduction and first reading of Senate public bills. Senator McCallum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honourable Senators, I have the honour to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Act.
Senator Martin.
My question is for the government leader in the Senate. Shortly after Minister Freeland delivered a budget full of inflationary spending, the inflation rate went up again. In its April report, Statistics Canada said Canadians paid over 28% more in mortgage interest costs that month, year over year. The IMF says Canada has the highest risk of mortgage defaults among advanced economies. This warning was delivered before the Bank of Canada raised the benchmark rate again to 4.75%. On Tuesday, our banking regulator told the banks to put aside more money in their rainy day funds to cover defaults amid high household debt and high interest rates. So, Leader, why doesn't the Trudeau government recognize that spending fuels higher inflation and interest rates, which are sending mortgage payments sky high?
Hear, hear.
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question. Respectfully, the government is not of the view that its spending has, in fact, had those results. Paul Vieira, the economist at Desjardins Security, was quite clear in his analysis of the budget that the spending announced in the budget was not especially inflationary. It is true that Canadians are suffering from high mortgage costs and high interest rates. This is a function of factors that go far beyond the government spending. Again, in the interest of respecting that my answers be short, I will refrain from citing all the examples that Mr. Vieira cited of why the economy of Canada is on a very sustainable and good track despite the problems.
Senator Martin.
Well, a National Bank of Canada report from earlier this month showed the average mortgage payments as a percentage of income in Canada is just under 61%. In Toronto, it's 82.8%, and in Vancouver, it's a whopping 94.9%.
Wow.
Again, this report came before the Bank of Canada increased rates to its highest level in 22 years. Canadians were already carrying the highest household debt in the G7. Now, many families are facing a crisis as their mortgage payments could increase by up to 40%. So, Leader, that number is not a partisan talking point. It's taken from the Bank of Canada report released in May. How can you possibly say the Trudeau government's economic strategy is a success, as you recently claimed?
Absolutely.
Gold.
My response to you earlier questions and my response to this question is not a response to, quote, partisanship. It is simply to provide accurate economic analysis. The fact is that mortgage rates are a function not only of interest rates but also of house prices, or the amount that one pays. Canadians are suffering with higher interest rates and challenges with affordable housing, but as I've said on many occasions, this is a function of many factors that have nothing to do with government monetary or fiscal policy. And the government has provided assistance to individuals in this country and providing support for the building of more low-cost housing. And it is simply incorrect to attribute the increasing share that Canadians unfortunately have to pay to sustain their mortgages simply to government spending. It is a function of far more market forces and others that anyone can fairly see.
Carignan.
Senator Carignan. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Mr. Leader, last April 27, I asked you a question on a request made by France to extradite a Canadian, Mr. Hassan Diab, who was condemned April 21, 2023, by a special court in Paris to a maximum sentence, and an international warrant was put out for him. This is after 43 years of investigations and a lot of sessions. He was found guilty of planting a device at a synagogue on Copernic Street in Paris, which killed many people and made many other victims. The government said it received the extradition request. It is studying it. And I quote, you said that, to be very clear, as soon as a decision is ready to be published, I will share it here in this chamber. So 2 months later, can you respect your commitment and share with us the government's decision? Senator Gold, thank you for the question. I would like to take this opportunity to correct something, and it was corrected in the media. The question you had asked said that we had received the extradition request, but as I told reporters, that is actually not the case. I made a mistake. I misspoke, and I apologize for that. In fact, no extradition request has been sent from France to Canada. So until that happens, until we receive an extradition request, no decision will be made by Canada. Senator Carignan, thank you for your frank response. I'm pleased that you are telling the chamber you misspoke at the time, because I learned this through the media. I learned through the media that you had misspoken. Does it happen a lot for you to misspeak, and would it not be better when you realize you've misspoken to tell the chamber right away instead of waiting for 2 months to do so? I will answer in good Québécois, and with all due respect, the answer is no. I rarely misspeak, and when I do so, I admit it.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My question is for you, Senator Gold. Both Minister Qualtrough and the Senate sponsor of Bill C-22 have acknowledged that the potential for clawbacks of the Canada Disability Benefit by private insurers is a real concern. How many Canadians does the government estimate are currently in receipt of long-term disability insurance and have income at or below the poverty line?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you for your question, Senator. I suspect that this information is not readily available. I certainly don't have it, as persons with disabilities may indeed have multiple sources of income from various sources, including various private insurance providers. I would reiterate to this chamber the government's commitment to lifting Canadians out of poverty by assuring their basic needs, such as safe and affordable housing, healthy food, and health care, are provided for. And the government's commitment to individual dignity is a key pillar in Canada's first poverty reduction strategy, which the government first released back in 2018.
Senator Pate.
Thank you very much for that. Since our debates on C-22, we've heard from a number of experts that some of the arguments put forth around the constitutionality of the lack of constitutionality of the amendment that was proposed and rejected by the government was actually a red herring, that the argument was not that the federal government has jurisdiction over regulating contracts, rather that the argument, as we were indicating, is that the ancillary doctrine allows the federal government to legislate otherwise invalid provisions in order to exercise, in order to achieve the objective that, as you have just pointed out, was the primary objective of the legislation, which is to achieve its valid exercise of spending authority to lift people out of poverty. Many of these experts have quoted the late Roderick MacDonald, Professor Roderick MacDonald, where he talked about the fact that historically watertight compartments metaphor of the spending of the ancillary doctrine have now been increasingly replaced by a more flexible doctrine that doesn't take such a bright line approach and is most significantly capable of enlarging that doctrine. And as the Supreme Court of Canada is moving into more expansive reading of ancillary and national dimensions doctrine, the limit of jurisdiction in each order of government becomes more difficult to pin down. I'm curious whether the government considered this perspective before putting people's access to the Canada Disability Benefit at risk by rejecting the amendment, and if so, why did they reject that analysis?
Gold.
Well, thank you for the question. Of course, the government considered all relevant constitutional positions, doctrines, and interpretations, and those of leading experts. I'm pleased that you mentioned the late Professor MacDonald. He was a colleague and a friend, as was Peter Hogg, the late Peter Hogg. I'm not going to repeat the analysis that Senator Cotter provided. I agree with him. It is 100% clear that the ancillary doctrine simply only applies when in the context of federal legislation under a federal legislative power. The spending power does not give Parliament the ability to legislate. The ancillary doctrine, therefore, does not apply. It is, respectfully to my friend and the late, though it is true that constitutional doctrines evolve, this one hasn't. And this one has been clearly established for decades and decades and decades, and is independent of whether or not cooperative federalism or the understanding of it ebbs and flows. I could go on at great length. The arguments have been made the government considered it. I believe the government made the correct decision with regard to the constitutionality, and I'm also confident that the government, in its negotiations with the provinces and territories, and the provinces and the territories in negotiations with their private companies, will do the right thing by way of protecting those persons receiving benefits under this important program.
Senator Lafreda.
Senator Lafreda. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To Senator Gold, the government representative in the Senate. Yesterday was National Indigenous Peoples Day, a day to acknowledge and celebrate the history, resilience, and diversity of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. It is also the perfect opportunity to recognize the entrepreneurship and business acumen of Indigenous peoples. There are many programs and initiatives to help Indigenous businesses access government funding and increase their market access. Navigating all these programs is quite overwhelming. There is very limited information online on how the service works. Senator Gold, can you provide us with an update on the launch, structure, and early results of these programs to help Indigenous entrepreneurs navigate through and find these programs?
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question. As I understand it, the Navigator is meant to help connect Indigenous businesses and owners, Indigenous organizations, and communities with programs and services that exist across many different departments and agencies of the federal government. And quite a number of those agencies are participating: Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, Canadian Economic Development for Quebec regions, and indeed, I mean, there's over a dozen, and again, they can be found easily. But they cover the span of this country and focus on economic development, women and gender equality, and the like. The Navigator process can be initiated by emailing navigator at sac-isc.gc.ca, providing certain details about one's business, community, organization, and information then will be transmitted.
Senator Lafreda.
Thank you. Thank you. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Thank you for that answer. How is the department measuring the success of the service? Are Indigenous entrepreneurs providing the department with feedback to help improve the service? Do we have performance indicators and targets in place in order to evaluate the success and effectiveness of the Navigator's service and manage the results, not only its funding and activities?
Senator Gold.
Thank you. It's an important question. But colleagues, this initiative was only launched a few months ago in February 2023. So I imagine it's somewhat premature to fully to evaluate the initiative. But I should say the government remains fully committed to working, listening to feedback, and continuing on improving the services that are offered to Indigenous persons and organizations across this country generally and through this program. Thank you.
Senator Black.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Government representative here in the Senate. Senator Gold, as we've seen time and time again, industry remains a vital partner in Canada's agricultural and agri-food sectors. From the adoption of the Grocery Code of Conduct to partnering with the Canadian Agriculture Human Resource Council for a national workforce strategy, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada and other federal departments, along with stakeholders and policymakers, know the importance of collaboration with industry in the ag sector. This helps to guarantee progressive and innovative approaches in making sure Canadians have access to high-quality and healthy foods. The Association of Canadian Advertisers, along with the Food, Health and Consumer Products of Canada, Restaurants Canada, and the Canadian Beverage Association, developed a code and guide for the responsible advertising of food and beverage products to children. And these organizations represent companies like Ferrero Canada, Coca-Cola, General Mills, Campbell's, Burnbrae Farms, Cavendish Farms, and many more. This ethical guideline and code often far exceeds the measures laid out in the proposed Bill C-252, and it goes into effect on July 1st of this year. Senator Gold, my question for you today is, why are the code and guide not being considered in the process of adjusting the regulations to marketing to children? And why is your government not collaborating and engaging with all industry stakeholders, instead denying the aforementioned organizations the opportunity to appear during committee stage of Bill C-252 in the other place? When will your government reach out to these organizations and work with industry? Thank you. Merci, Megwich.
Thank you, honourable colleague, for bringing the Chamber's attention back to the important issue that we dealt with in the past, supporting healthy eating habits for everyone, including children. With regard to the code that you referred to, I've been advised that the code would only apply to its members, and that only on a voluntary basis. And while many of Canada's food and beverage industry stakeholders are members of the signatory associations, I understand that the code would not apply to a large number of small, medium-sized enterprises, as well as some large retailers and companies. Instead of adopting a voluntary code that may or may not apply to a given industry member, Health Canada issued a policy update 2 months ago, April 2023, with regard to restricting the advertising of food and beverages to children, starting with advertising on television and digital media. And I've been advised that this policy update, which is the first step in the drafting of regulations, was informed by extensive consultations with industry and partners between 2016 and 2019.
Senator Black, no. Okay, Senator Cordy.
Speaker. Senator Gold, in March of this year, the government committed up to $1.5 billion over 3 years to establish the first ever national strategy for drugs for rare diseases, and that is really great news. On Monday, we marked the 6th National Sickle Cell Awareness Day in Canada. An estimated 6,000 Canadians live with sickle cell disease anemia. Speaking with patients and advocates this week, the announced rare drug strategy has raised hope, but also uncertainties. Senator Gold, sickle cell advocate groups and associations are concerned that their input may not be considered or that they won't be included in the government's advisory council, which is promised to be established by this summer. How can advocates get a seat at the table to ensure that sickle cell anemia is not left out and to ensure that new drugs will finally be available to those with sickle cell anemia?
Senator Gold.
Well, thank you very much for bringing attention to Canada's first ever national strategy for drugs for rare diseases, which was announced earlier this year. It's supported, as colleagues may know, of an investment of up to $1.5 billion over 3 years. Now, regarding the distribution of the funds, up to $1.4 billion may go to the provinces and territories through the bilateral agreements that are being negotiated. And further details of these, of course, including your question with regard to the issue of sickle cell anemia, will be announced as the negotiations move forward. But with regard to your other question, Senator, my understanding is that the national strategy reflects extensive consultations that garnered diverse perspectives from over 650 individuals and organizations, including patients with lived experience, family members, and caregivers. If it turns out, Senator, that for some reason or other the interests of those representing sickle cell anemia have not been consulted, please let my office know, and I'll make every effort to connect them with the appropriate persons.
Senator Cordy.
Thank you very much for that invitation, and I will certainly follow through if I hear from the advocates. So thank you very much for that, Senator Gold. My second question is newborn screening for sickle cell is an important tool for prevention and early diagnosis. Currently, only a select number of provinces and territories screen for sickle cell anemia, and I'm pleased that former Premier Stephen McNeil's support of Nova Scotia supported and approved newborn screening for sickle cell in my province of Nova Scotia in 2013, 10 years ago. So my question is, will funds under this program be available to provinces and territories to help establish uniform screening policies across the country? And what are the anticipated timelines for allocating the different funding streams to the provinces and territories and organizations, I guess? Sorry.
Well, thank you. Look, it's an important question. I'm not seized with the details of the negotiations. They vary from province to province and territory because, as we know, the health is an exclusive provincial jurisdiction. The federal is providing funds, and happily, provinces have agreed to share data. But beyond that, the Government of Canada has not purported to tell the provinces how to spend their money out of respect for their jurisdiction and for the particular needs. So, again, I encourage those stakeholders to work with their associations and with their provincial governments to put that on the table so that the funds that are available can be used, can be properly used and effectively used. Thank you.
Senator Rousakos.
Senator Gold, as we break for the summer holidays, suffering Canadians continue to suffer under the results of an inflationary Trudeau economy. And the hardest hit Canadians are going to be whacked now a second time by the Trudeau government with a second carbon tax on July 1st, on Canada Day of all days. And of course, as we all know, Senators, middle class and poor Canadians spend a higher percentage of their earnings on fuel, on food, on things that they need to sustain their families. And of course, we also have seen reports come out by the parliamentary budget officer highlighting how this action, the second carbon tax, is going to cost Canadian families thousands of dollars more over the next decade from coast to coast to coast. So while your government continues to say all the time in their talking points that inflation is out of their control and there's nothing they can do about it, you just said it momentarily ago to a question from Senator Martin, I have a simple question in order to bring some relief to these Canadians. Can you press pause on this cruel second carbon tax and give some relief to poor and middle-class Canadians?
Doug Gold.
Thank you. Without parsing how you characterized my answer, because I think it was somewhat incorrect. As I said many times before, the price on pollution is an important tool in this government's efforts to slow down climate change and help mitigate the ravages that we are experiencing increasingly, not only in our country, in every corner of our country, but in this world. And I reflect, and your question makes me also reflect upon the ceremony just recently to which I referred in the raising of the survivor's flag. What is the link? Because person after person, Indigenous leader and survivor after, the answer is clearly no. But I am going to take the liberty of reminding.
Senator Gold is speaking.
I'm going to take the liberty of reminding us that it is not simply government policy that is attempting to mitigate the crisis, but this is a responsibility that we have we're borrowing this land from our grandchildren, as was said. We have a responsibility, and the government is doing its part. And yes, taxes and rising costs are a challenge for Canadians. The government has stepped up and is helping Canadians, and it is doing so in a responsible, fiscally prudent way. The art of governing is the art of making important choices and dealing with more than one subject at a time. And this government is on track to do precisely that.
Lusako, supplementary.
So let me get this straight. After your first carbon tax, where you pummeled middle-class Canadians into the ground of becoming poor, and you've had no impact on your environmental targets, you've hit none of them, zero, you're telling me now a second carbon tax to continue your insanity in your failed policy of saving the environment by killing poor and middle-class Canadians is somehow a magic bullet. Congratulations. So you failed on your environmental targets, you've succeeded in setting record high inflation, and you've succeeded in growing the poor number of Canadians in this country and the dwindling middle class. So the question is simple. Will your government at least try some of this common sense policies that we're putting forward as an opposition and put a pause on the second carbon tax to give some badly needed relief to middle class and poor Canadians that are suffering while we go on vacation?
Yes, or no.
Senator Gold.
I have resisted, and I will continue to resist being sucked into this kind of simplistic and partisan talking points. The short answer is this is not a serious response to a global environmental and economic crisis, and the country would be served better, at least in this chamber, if not in the other place, with serious policy alternatives instead of simply repeating talking points for the benefit of your Twitter feed.
Senator Fedra.
Wallen.
Thanks to Senator Plett for this time. Senator Gold, in October of 2022, Lilly Pharmaceuticals stopped making glucagon. No one was told, not drugstores nor the millions of diabetics for whom this is a life-saving medication. They said it was on back order. They eventually replaced the product with a nasal spray that has horrific side effects. My adult niece nearly died 3 nights ago from choking on her own blood. Novo Nordisk makes a similar product, Glucagen, but they cannot handle the extreme increase in demand for prescriptions. According to Nova, they have been asking Health Canada to bring this product in from the States to help save lives, as even Canadian hospitals have not been able to secure the product for life-saving measures, again, as my niece discovered 3 nights ago. Senator Gold, can you please beg the Minister of Health and Health Canada to approve the import of the replacement product from the U.S. before someone dies? I'm not asking for an answer from you. Please just raise this as an urgent matter.
Senator Gold.
I certainly will. I'm so sorry to hear what your niece had to go through. Thank goodness that she survived the ordeal. I certainly will do everything I can to bring this to the minister's attention.
Senator Wallen. Supplementary? No.
No, thank you.
Senator Coyle.
My question is for Senator Gold. The Toronto Star recently reported that $7.8 billion earmarked for climate programs between 2016 and 2022 were either unspent or spent at a slower pace than planned. For example, the Investing in Canada Infrastructure program was supposed to direct $5.5 billion to public transit and green infrastructure by 2021-2022, but had only spent 43% of it by that time. Cabinet ministers have responded that the flow of money to projects depends on the pace that those projects are completed by Canadians. On Monday, Prime Minister Trudeau told the Atlantic Economic Forum that Canada's action on climate will attract investors from abroad. But Senator Gold, investors are looking for the actual installation of more renewable energy and the actual construction of new green infrastructure in Canadian communities. I believe that at this moment, funding for that program that I mentioned earlier has now been allocated. But most importantly, Senator Gold, what does the federal government do to ensure that these types of climate programs are well understood by the people, businesses, and communities who are eligible for them? And what lessons are we learning from this to ensure that Canadians make full use of the billions in investment tax credits for clean technology manufacturing and clean electricity announced in Budget 2023?
Senator Gold.
Thank you for your question and raise an important point. We know the government is actively involved in communicating the opportunities for investors to invest in Canada in these initiatives. Minister Champagne is well known for the energy with which he approaches this task and the success that he's reached, but it's true of across the government. Some of the important point that you raised about communication, both to businesses abroad but to Canadians as well, is well taken. There's consultations with stakeholders and the public and governments, affected governments, on the design of each of these programs. And as projects are being contemplated, those conversations continue. And awareness campaigns will be and may be undertaken for new specific instances. Having said that, I agree with you that clear communication to Canadians, sustained communication to Canadians and abroad is important to the success of this, as it is for any initiative.
There's 25 seconds. If you have a short question, please do ask. If you have a short answer to that. So there's not enough time for another question, so the time for question period has expired. You have 25 seconds. Well, you were not. Actually, Senator Platt was on the list before you, so I'm sorry. Time for question period has expired. Delayed answers, réponse différée. Sénatrice Laboucan-Benson.
Senator Laboucan-Benson.
Answers to the following written questions. Reply to question number 33, dated November 23, 2021, appearing on the order paper and notice paper in the name of the Honourable Senator Platt regarding Canada Revenue Agency. Reply to question number 66, dated November 23, 2021, appearing on the order paper and notice paper in the name of the Honourable Senator Platt regarding Canada's military justice system. Reply to question number 159, dated May 5, 2022, appearing on the order paper and notice paper in the name of the Honourable Senator Platt regarding the answers provided by the Department of National Defence to order paper question number 15 during the first session of the 44th Parliament. And reply to question number 207, dated February 2, 2023, appearing on the order paper and notice paper in the name of the Honourable Senator Platt regarding the Newfoundland-Labrador Fixed Transportation Link.